Okay, I think
There we
everybody's
go.
been admitted. Everybody has been muted upon entry. You can unmute yourselves, but we're going to ask everybody to stay muted during the presentation.
So, thank you all for joining. I'm Tom with Project Hope. Today, we're going to be going over the Minnesota Rental Assistance Program and how homelessness prevention organizations like yours can get a better understanding of the program and help the tenants in need apply. Briefly, the Rent Up MN program is an emergency assistance for past due rent and utilities that's administered by the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. We at Project Hope are a field partner with MHFA, and we're 13 organizations that generally serve Hennepin County, with some of our pieces going statewide. Our role is to do community outreach to let people know about this program and also assist them in completing this government complicated application that there are a lot of complexities to. We right now offer services in English, Somali, Hmong, and Oromo, and shortly we will also be offering services in Spanish. So generally, who is eligible for this program? Well, they have to be a renter in the state of Minnesota. Currently, homeowners are not eligible, and there will be a separate program for that. They have to have past due rent or utilities. The state says or utilities because right now you can only apply for past due utilities if you also have past due rent. At some point that will be changing where eligible applicants can apply for only past due utilities, but that's a ways out. And then their total household income has to be less than 80% of the area median income. That is total gross before taxes. And as you'll see a little bit later, that area median income is displayed as part of the application. So that's not something you need to know or the applicant needs to know. That information will be provided. And the one you're going to get a lot of questions about is must have experienced COVID hardship. The state says it needs to be something that's demonstrated. And a lot of people get caught up on that. How do I prove that COVID has affected me? And really for this, it's if they qualify for unemployment. If their income is at that less than 80% threshold, and a lot of it is self-determination. If somebody says, I've had more expenses, they don't necessarily have to document or demonstrate those expenses. There's some check boxes that they can mark that can talk a little bit about their situation. So it's really up to them. If they feel that they have experienced COVID hardship and they meet the other requirements, they should apply for this program. And then what's covered? It's up to 12 months of rent, electric, water, gas, sewer, and solid fuel bills. No other types of bills, utilities will be considered. There are a few little caveats for things like legal fees if they have to go through an eviction hearing, and hotel fees if that becomes their primary residence. That will be done on a case-by-case basis. All of these had to have become past due after the official pandemic declaration, which was March 13th of 2020. Right now, they can also apply for 3 months of future rent, giving a total of 15 months of rent coverage. That number of 15 is going to be expanded to 18 at some point. The federal government is still working out some decisions and qualifications with the state of Minnesota. Rent, water, gas, sewer, solid fuel are not eligible for any sort of future coverage. So what needs to be prepared? There's a lot of information that this application needs. You need the applicant's full name, their address, which has to match what's actually on their bills. Social security numbers are not required, but allow for the processing to go a lot faster. The official ID is not required to have a photo ID or a traditional ID. There is a self-certification that can be filled out from the state, which we'll have the link to a little bit later, that they can fill that out instead of providing a traditional ID, particularly when they don't have one. Email address really speeds the process along and helps with communication, and same thing with phone number. As a part of creating their account, they're going to need to do a username and a 15-character password. That's a lot. It's a lot for anybody to come up with or remember. The best practice that we've found is come up with a phrase. So it's not trying to remember 15 characters, it's trying to remember 2, 3, or 4 words. And then they need to know the number of people at the address for both adults and children. This is not necessarily the number of people on the lease. So there can be a difference between what's shared on the lease and what actually counts as your household. For everyone 18 and older, you need full names and dates of birth. For anyone under 18, you only need the dates of birth. And then when it comes to income, it's the total amount for everyone 18 and older. They also need to have their past due bills, which include their past due amounts, and it needs to be broken down monthly. For most past due rent, the tenant can ask for a tenant ledger that the landlord will provide and will have all of that broken down. For utilities, most of the major ones, somewhere buried in their online access, do have a month-by-month breakdown to show what's past due when. Some of the smaller ones don't do that, but they've been open to phone calls or emails requesting that and providing that either to us as navigators or to the applicants themselves. We need to make sure that those documents all include the name of the company, the account number of the utility, and again, all of that broken down by amount, month, and fee type so they can document late fees, etc. When it comes to additionally what information the applicant needs from the landlord, there's 2 possibilities. If the landlord has already gone in and registered into the system, they just need to know the address of that the landlord registered, and then they can go in and find it in the system, tag themselves, they're good to go. If the landlord hasn't registered, the applicant needs their full name, phone numbers, email addresses, and mailing address. And one way or the other, the landlord, property manager, property owner is going to need to register with the Rent Help MN process. It's just if they're going to register on their own initially, or if they're going to get a notice from Rent Help MN saying, hey, you have a tenant who's filed an application. We need this information from you. For income documentation, again, it's for everyone in the household 18 and older. And it has to report all of the household income. Everyone has a different situation. Every household has a different situation. So you're going to need to mix and match kind of whatever is most applicable and most appropriate to that person. Generally speaking, the easiest ones to start with are the 2020 IRS 1040 forms. But again, not everybody's going to have it. Alternatively, you can do 60 days of pay stubs, 1099s, W-2s. If they receive any sort of benefits, we're going to need Social Security, unemployment, child support, SNAP, TAF. We need those benefit letters to be able to show what amount is received and that they qualify for them. And those letters do need to be dated after January 1st, 2020. Income includes a lot. It's all of their wages, salary, bonus, tips, commissions, severance pay, workers' comp, interest and dividends from assets. If they're operating their own business, which you are going to run into a lot, either their net income or their self-employment, whether it's from direct sales or a business. Schedule Cs are always really nice for somebody who is running their own business. And then the unemployment benefits, Social Security, pensions, retirement funds, all that good stuff, all counts as income. But so does payouts from insurance, child support, alimony. And if they get regular gifts or online donations, that all needs to be documented. Any temporary assistance for needy families, and any of that armed forces special pay. When it comes to the past due bills, you want to make sure, again, you have the rent statement and the tenant ledger and all of those electric documents. The big thing you're going to get is, what about this? What about that document? How about here? The general rule of thumb is that we want to include the applicant name, the resident address, the account number, the past due amounts, the due dates, and that monthly breakdown. And as always, who that is actually owed to. And some of the questions you're going to get a lot. Right? What is a household? You know, it's very vaguely defined in the application, but it's really who's ever residing there at the time of the application or within that 60-day period of income documentation beforehand. Another one is what happens when it changes? You know, what if somebody is on the lease and moved out? So my lease says they're there, but they're not contributing income because they don't live there anymore. The state put together a change of household form that is on their resources page that is really nice to fill out when you have those kind of odd situations. That's also where you're going to see these self-attestations for the ID information, the income documents, and some rental ones. We know not everybody has a formal lease. Not everybody gets formal past due rent statements. So there are some fillable PDFs on that resources page where you can fill it out to whatever is most applicable to the person you're helping's situation. Similar to the resources page, there is also a great FAQ page, which is on their Learn More link, that'll provide a lot of information around kind of these special situations that you're going to experience as a part of this. And next, we're going to kick over to a pre-recorded video that gives you a relatively brief walkthrough of kind of what this application entails and looks like from the applicant's perspective.
Welcome to the Rent Help MN website. We have a variety of tools to help tenants through their application process. Navigate our menu and
I do that every
Welcome
time.
to the Rent Help MN website. We have a variety of tools to help tenants through their application process. Navigate our menu to access additional resources and information.
Hey, Tom,
And select your language.
sorry to interrupt, but we are not we're still looking at your slide. We're not seeing the video.
Right. Thank you for that. That means I'm going to need to do a little shuffle. How about now?
Perfect.
Welcome to the Rent Help MN website. We have a variety of tools to help tenants through their application process. Navigate our menu to access additional resources and information, relevant news, and select your language preference. Currently, we are in phase 1 and only open to tenants with past due rent and utilities. Please view the renter checklist available in a PDF to download. This will help you prepare documents and information needed for your application. When you're ready to begin your application process, select Renters Apply Now. Please make sure to have all of your information and documents ready before starting. This is the fastest way to complete an application. You will be redirected to the application creation or login page. Here you will go through a brief pre-qualification process to determine your eligibility for this program. Below is an overview of the program, what to expect, and what you need during your process. Select the Tenants Apply Now button to begin. Select the documentation checklist for an overview of materials needed for your application. Select Click here to start the pre-screening process for determining your eligibility. If you are working with a field partner, select Yes, enter their ID code. If not, select Continue without field partner or No to continue. Question 1. Enter your address and confirm the auto-filled information is correct. Next, see if your 2020 household size and income limits meet the criteria. Select Yes if you meet the criteria and continue with the registration. Question 2. Select yes or no if you have qualified for unemployment or have had trouble paying rent and utilities due to COVID-19. Question 3. Confirm whether or not you are a renter in Minnesota with past due rent. Fill the form to register and begin your application. When all areas are filled, select register at the end of the page. Pre-qualification does not guarantee approval for funding. Once you are registered, you will have a dashboard where you can access your application. This dashboard will appear after login as well. Your application ID, the program you are applying for, status of your application, explanation of status, and action are displayed. The message tab will list any correspondence between you and the case manager reviewing your application. To begin or continue your application, select Begin Application. There are 9 total sections to the application. The first section, Applicant, requires your personal information such as name, date of birth, household size, and any demographic information you wish to provide. Confirm if the property is your primary residence and currently occupied by you. Next, add any additional members of your household and their corresponding information. The second section, Assistance, will ask whether you have applied or received any other assistance. Confirm if you are a renter and search for your landlord. If your landlord is not displayed, enter their contact information. Under Rent, select whether you need assistance for your rent, who pays the bill, and your eviction status. Select the months your rent is past due, amounts paid, and fees due. Remember to request up to 3 months in advance of assistance if needed. Select the utilities you have past due. Only electric, water, gas, and sewer are eligible. Their months, amount due, any amounts paid, and fees due. Provide your utility information, including account numbers, who pays the bill, and the status of your utilities. Select Save and Continue if this section is complete. Third section, Duplicative Benefits, is filled out based on the information you provided in section 2. Review this section and select Previous at the bottom of the page if you need to make corrections. Otherwise, type your name as it appears to sign and select Save and Continue. The fourth section, Income, is where you will enter all sources of income and their amounts from annual income documents or the last 60 days of pay stubs. You will need to provide all income documents of all earning adults 18 and older in your household and all adults who have no income. For pay stub documentation, select Other Income Documents on the Proof of Income type drop-down menu. Next, select all forms of income that apply. Select income type, interval, and gross amount. If you do not have documentation, select attestation and sign the form after entering all income types. For documentation, make sure to upload documents alongside the income amounts. The total annualized income will appear at the bottom of the page. Click Save and Continue once finished with the income section. The fifth section is about your COVID-19 hardship. Here you will self-certify all areas that apply to your situation. At the bottom of the page, provide your electronic signature and click Save and Continue when ready. The sixth section of your application is the privacy policy. Please read and provide your electronic signature if you agree. Click Save and Continue to proceed. The seventh section is the terms and conditions. Please read this page and sign and date to acknowledge you understand the terms and conditions of this application. The eighth section is the release of information. If you agree to authorize per the conditions listed, provide your e-signature and click Save and Continue. The ninth and final section of your application is the package submission page. You can review the documents already uploaded and see the additional documents needed. For rent agreement and past due statement section, you may download either a template if applicable or review the document you uploaded. You will also need to upload utility documents for which you requested assistance. Before submitting your application, please review that you have provided all of your information, documentation, and have requested all of the necessary assistance. Applications cannot be changed after being submitted. Once you are ready to submit your application, click Complete. You will be returned to your dashboard where your application status will be pending initial review. Under Actions, click on the pre-qualification letter to see a copy of your proof of pre-qualified and submitted application. You may show this to your landlord if they request confirmation of your application submission. If you have any questions or concerns, contact 211 for assistance.
Right, so thank you, everybody. I know we're having the occasional technical difficulties, but appreciate you working through with us. So let me go back to the screen share again. There we are. So you've gotten a lot of information already. You can see it's a relatively complicated application. We want to let you know that the state has it both digitally and via a printable PDF in English, Hmong, Somali, and Spanish. On the Rent Help MN resources page, you can download that PDF, you can print it off, you can fill it out on your computer, you can fill it out by hand. And although it is a much slower process, you can also submit the application and your documents via mail and via fax. It is significantly slower. So that's something we always want to make people aware of. And one of the questions you're always going to get is, why is this so complicated? Why is this so slow? So I always like to give a little context around where it came from, how it functions, and kind of what the experience is as a navigator, as well as what it's going to be as an applicant. So this program was a piece of legislation from the US Congress, who provided the funds and the original design. That was then passed to the Department of Treasury, who narrowed the congressional design a little bit, which was then passed to their council, who made sure that it was in compliance with federal law. That was then given to the state of Minnesota to be an administrator. That was then given to the Minnesota Finance Housing Agency to be the actual state agency administrator. Then we have the Rent Help MN application and process CERS. So there is one organization who built and designed the application itself. There is another who does the review of the submitted applications, who's the case managers. There's quality assurance, who is the review of the reviewers, and a separate organization who issues payments. Then you have us, navigators here at Project Hope, and organizations like yours who help people complete these applications. And then we can never forget that at the end of the day, this is about the applicants and the landlords, the people who need this help. And one of the reasons I always like to highlight this is when there's a question, if we don't have the answer, if the state doesn't have the answer, they have to go up to the Department of Treasury, who has to go to their lawyers, who then answers the state, who then answers MHFA, who then answers us. So there can be a long delay when there are very specific policy questions. And then there's the process that the application itself goes through. Here is the MHFA official process for what an application goes through. So I'll just give you a minute, take a look. It's really standard government procedure, easy to understand, right? In no way complicated. So I'm going to break it down in a little bit relatively more simple process. And that's that pre-screening you saw is the general eligibility. Some people get caught up on having their income exactly right in that pre-screening, as long as it's close. It doesn't need to be exact, because that's just generally speaking, are they eligible? Then the applicant creates their account, they enter in their information, documentation, and submit it. And at this point, that's where, for the first round, the applicant is done. So they get their pre-qualification letter that they can share with their landlord or their utility companies. and their status goes into pending initial review. That's the first time that the landlord will get a notice that says a tenant has started an application. Then it gets reviewed by a case manager. The case manager will follow up with the applicant or the navigator or both if there are any questions or missing documents. When that gets provided, it goes back to the case manager, who makes sure everything is there. If it is, it goes to quality assurance to review to make sure the case manager did their job. Then the landlord gets an email saying, here is the information we've received. Is this all correct? If it is, it gets again reviewed by quality assurance, and then a decision is made, an approval or denial. And then it gets batched for payment, and then payment sent. So after payment is sent, it is going to trigger for the applicant a reapply button. As you would imagine, with the length of this process, it takes months. So people become more past due on their bills. So although, yes, there is that 3 months of future rent, sometimes it takes longer than that. And that also means that the reapply is a great place to start the next application for the next round of assistance. And the really good news is they don't have to re-enter in all of their information, which makes it a lot more smooth. And with that, we are going to go to another pre-recorded video from Rich to talk a little bit about what that landlord side is like. And so you can have a little bit more of an understanding of what they go through as well. Which does mean we're going to have to do a stop screen share, a shuffle to make sure that we can get everybody up and you can actually see the video this time.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody.
Which hasn't started yet, but we'll get there.
Richard here from Passion Hope. I was asked to come and answer a few questions. So I'm going to go over some common things on the landlord side, since that's usually who I work with in this partnership here. First thing we're going to talk about is account creation, registering a property, and then the document submission, right? When you make an account as a landlord, it's really a two-step process. So for you folks out there working with clients, maybe work with landlords, you want to let them know that the first thing they're going to do is have to establish an account, right? Once they establish an account, the second part of that is where they register their individual properties, that they have multiple properties, right? Document submission can happen either on the front end, or sometimes it actually happens again. Actually, it goes better to happen in the back end. And I say that because they're going to ask for a W-9 and some other documentation as a landlord to qualify your payments or approve your payments. However, it may change over time, we're learning. So right now it's going to be a W-9 and electronic transfer statement that you'll have to fill out. But I say that with a caveat that the state of Minnesota or Rent Help MN may come back and ask for other documentation from landlords moving forward. Okay, so I'm just like to preface that, for our landlords out there, that they may require some other documentation even after that initial submission of your documents. The second thing I want to talk about is when they get the first notice of a tenant application. So as a landlord, when will I find out that my tenant has applied for Rent Help MN? It's not an instantaneous process, but it is pretty quick. What happens is a tenant will put in an application and it will be attached. Once you register and put your properties into the system, it will be attached to that individual property by the property address. And this is just a note why it's very important to put your property addresses in there correctly as both landlords and as tenants, because that's how it attaches the properties, by that address. So we need the correct property address. And of course, that will tie it to the landlord's account. So for your residents, your landlord will be able to see that you have an application of Rent Help MN. And for your landlords, you'll be able to see how many of your residents have applied and under what specific properties. So as landlords, with the verification portion, meaning when do we find out that a tenant or a resident has put in the application? It does not happen instantaneously. There's a manual process that has to happen, but the application will be tied to your account based on address. And that address that I previously talked about will then give you the opportunity to verify the information in their application. That means the rent amounts, late fees, and then of course the address where the payments will be sent. Now, the funds are transferred electronically. We do understand that. However, they will still require a business address and have that address verified for all funding. Moving into our next question. When, how they receive notice, meaning landlords, of an award denial. There was many steps in the rent helping process, so it's a little misleading to think in the terms of just an award and a denial. There's many things that can halt an application. Things on the landlord side, like needing verification of a W-9 or specific property address, or just an updated ledger that verifies what the tenant said, right? So in those many steps, it can hold up an application. But the only reason that application will truly be denied is if the resident did not qualify for whatever reason that is. And then just for landlords, a resident can always reapply if that was made a mistake. Now, as far as an award goes, you will be notified in two ways. One way should be an email that you receive, letting you know that there's information in the portal for you to review. And that email should talk a little bit about the award and either a case number or the individual resident that's receiving that award. The other way, which I talked about a little bit, is through the portal. You have your user login information that you use, along with your password. You can check the status of those applications. And once an award is given, there will be a status update that will let you know, and it will say payment sent, letting you know that everything's approved and that your payment's on the way. Right now, it is taking between 3 to 4 months. I say about 3.5 months for landlords to actually see the electronic payments make it to their bank accounts. So from start to finish, meaning application submitted on the residence part, landlords submitting all the needed material, getting all that updated material, it takes about 3 months for that entire payment process. Just a takeaway, and this is specifically to our landlord partners here. We value and we understand that you're needed in this process. But the one thing I like to be clear with the landlords is that this is a voluntary process. And if you enter into this agreement, meaning you are accepting of these rental assistance dollars on the resident's behalf to make sure that they're caught up under rent, and of course, so you can pay your expenses, right? It's a contractual agreement. And I like to be clear with this because once you are in agreement of taking these funds, you can no longer think about getting rid or evicting those tenants. We have a lot of landlords that ask if can we accept the funding, but because of other issues or because of rent or failure to pay rent, we would like to remove these tenants. And I just like to be very, very clear with landlords that you cannot. You cannot. This is a rental assistance program to help residents stay housed. So if you have no interest or you don't plan on keeping that tenant in their housing, it may be hard to accept and receive these funds.
And next up, we're going to talk a bit about some of the best practices that we at Project Hope have learned in this whole experience. As you can imagine and have seen, it's a complicated process. So the easier we can make it for you, the easier we can make it for us, the easier we can make it for the applicants. There's two main pathways that we work with applicants. The first is virtual and over the phone. Sometimes it's email, sometimes it's text, sometimes it's phone calls. The biggest thing is always to have the applicant be prepared with all of those documents and all of that information. When that's done, it goes so much faster and so much easier. You also want to have your organization to have some means to receive these documents. Getting them via text and via email is really smooth. A lot of people can just take a screenshot on their phone or take a photo and text it right over. We have a desktop phone system that we can receive texts through, which makes it easy to just download, upload, put in the application, and you're good to go. Some things to be aware of: the application only functions with PDF, PNG, and JPEGs. Although sometimes Word and Excel documents will be accepted as an upload, they will be rejected in the review process for the application. So you want to make really certain that you're using the PDFs, PNGs, and JPEGs. And the other one you want to be aware of is the HEIC file format. That is the default format on iPhones when you take a screenshot. And so it's always good to have somebody on staff who is very familiar with going in and changing those settings so that you can get your PNGs or JPEGs when people are taking screenshots. And you want to have step-by-step explanations of where and how to find those other common documents. The ones we've talked about, the utility bills and histories and those benefit letters, can be really hard to track down, particularly if you're not hyper aware or of where they live in this digital realm, and if you're not particularly comfortable with technology or computers or the internet. Finding those can be a big barrier. We found it always helps to have a little step-by-step walkthrough of where to find each of those. And then the pre-qualification letters. Those are so important for showing landlords and utility companies that somebody's actually pursuing help. Excuse me. So it's always great to know where to find that so you can direct people so that they can share it. And then case manager requests. If you're registered with the state as a navigator and have access to the navigation portal, you're going to get a little comms tab that will give you information. As if you aren't, the applicants are going to get emails about what's still needed, which is why emails are so important. They are working on some wraparound procedures with phone calls and mailing and faxing to make this more accessible. But right now, it really slows down the process when somebody isn't able to communicate via email, which is problematic because a lot of the people who need this help also happen to be the people who don't necessarily have reliable high-speed internet access or access to a computer. And on that, this application only works in Chrome and only works on a computer. You can start it in Edge or Mozilla or on a smartphone or on a tablet, but there are specific stages that it will freeze and lock on if you're not in Chrome and on a standard computer. And with that, we've got another pre-recorded that we're going to show you from one of our navigators who specializes both in-person and virtual, to kind of share a little bit more information about the similarities and the differences, as well as kind of what you can do for best practices.
On a technical level, there isn't much difference between in-person and virtual applications. The main difference is that there is a more human nature to the in-person applications. Applicants are more apt to open up and talk in person much more than over the phone. Because of this, in-person applications will take longer than virtual applications. I found that really the only tools I need are my laptop, internet, and phone. Some applicants, if not most, will want to text you pictures of their documents. You will need to have access to a scanner if applicants don't text their documents to you before the in-person appointment. I found that going back and forth to the scanner, naming and saving the document to your computer and scanning the next document is extremely time-consuming. If the applicants can text you the documents ahead of time, it is such a time saver. As long as applicants have all the correct documents with them, there really won't be any issues. The only issues that I ran into are when an applicant doesn't have the correct documents and we have to take extra time to try and get them from their sources. Utility companies have been a particular challenge. There are two general approaches to starting an application. Starting the first time you're with an applicant, or starting an application once they've collected all their documents and information. By creating the applications ahead of time and waiting until later to get documents, I think this is way more difficult because you might have 15 or 20 applications that are incomplete on your dashboard and you have to follow up with each applicant to get their documents. This could take several weeks. I know I've waited up to 2 months, maybe longer, for some applicants to get all their documents in. And sometimes it's not their fault and there's nothing we can do about it. So for me, the biggest drawback about starting an application ahead of not having all the documentation needed is that you have to continue to follow up with each applicant. I feel as if it puts more job and responsibility on us, and we already have a lot that we're dealing with without having to remember what documents we need from home. By putting that responsibility on the applicants, that kind of frees us up to continue on to other applicants who may be ready to submit an application. As for waiting to schedule an application until applicants have all documents ready, this is the best approach I've come across. This way, it's on the applicants to get everything ready and then contact me when they're ready to apply. If the applicant, landlord, or utility company have any questions, I always give the applicant my direct line for this project and tell them to contact me. If any of the debtors have questions or concerns, they can give my number to them as well. This makes for a much smoother process when all of us work together. Once the applicant has all their documents, then they'll call me and we schedule an appointment to meet up. If they've emailed or texted over their documents ahead of time, it will go much quicker as I already have everything labeled and saved on my computer and I won't have to do that at our appointment. If not, then that's an extra step that I have to do during our in-person appointment. Having an empathetic ear and being patient will go a long way in speaking to applicants and getting a successful application submitted.
And next up, we're going to give you just some of our other kind of training best practices and additional resources that are out there for helping yourselves and for helping the applicants. One of the questions you're always going to get from your staff is, what if I do something wrong? What if my mistake is the reason that someone loses their home? And the good answer to that is there are purposefully built in a lot of checks and balances. Every time you hear about a case manager going back to clarify or asking for other documents, that's to make sure that it's right. Because we're all human, mistakes are going to happen. It's part of the process. So as much as we want to negate them, we also need to be aware that it's going to happen. So it's good to let them know that there are checks and balances in place to catch those errors. Another one you're going to get a lot is, can an incomplete application be submitted? The technical answer to that is no. An application needs to have all of its appropriate documents and information to be submitted. The workaround answer is, well, sort of. When you get past the income documentation portion of the application and you're at the part where you upload all of your other documents, you technically can not upload all of the documents or not upload all of the right documents, and the system will accept it. The big problem with that is it will always delay the process. There's always going to be more back and forth, more questions, more pieces that are needed. So although technically, yes, you can, and sometimes in emergency situations, it can be helpful. The general rule of thumb is no, you should not submit an incomplete application. And then what about landlord assistance? You're going to get questions from landlords of saying, hey, I know you're working with this applicant. How can you help me? Well, we at Project Hope do have a landlord assistance phone line at our 612-444-3301. You'll select your language, press 4, and you will get the landlord channel. The state also has a landlord email, which is landlords@renthelpmn.org, which they can send messages to for some of their technical help. We covered reapplications quite a bit earlier, so we're going to jump right to the it depends. You're going to get so many questions about, can I use this document? Can I use this piece of information? And for the majority of the time, the answer is going to be, well, it depends. It depends on what's included. It depends on what other documents you have. And the way to think about this is, even though it's a complicated application process, there is a lot of flexibility as long as all of the information required is accounted for. So you're going to have a lot of it depends. And we also want to let you know to be okay to say, I don't know. We know there's a long chain for a lot of the complicated questions, But for a lot of the ones that us as navigators are familiar with, always feel free to say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And you can reach out to us at Project Hope for answers. You can check the MHFA FAQs. And there's a lot of good resources like that who can provide all of that. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Beth to talk about some other information you're going to get questions about and some resources that are available.
Hello, folks. Tom and others with this workshop asked me if I would mention something about the eviction moratorium that's in Minnesota, about the utility moratorium off-ramp, and then about the mediation services. So first, just a brief overview on the eviction moratorium. This is something that the Minnesota legislature came up with, and it's been confusing, so I'm going to try and simplify it a little bit. There's two key provisions in this eviction moratorium. And the first is that the legislature recognized that there's a tremendous amount of federal dollars available, and it's going to take some time to get all of that money out. So they have linked the off-ramp to the Rent Help MN and the zero balance application. And as long as somebody has a pending application, they have safe harbor until June 1st of 2022. The second piece of the moratorium that they addressed is there were a number of tenant organizations that were advocating for Minnesota to permanently adopt a landlord required notice. So a landlord couldn't simply go down and file for an eviction without giving notice to their renters. There's a temporary notice requirement that's part of the moratorium, and that's going to go until October 12th. And it requires all landlords to provide a 15-day notice. There are some properties that are still covered under the CARES Act. About 20% of rental properties are under the CARES Act, which requires a 30-day notice. And the city of Minneapolis has a permanent 14-day notice. One of the unintended consequences we're seeing with this new notice requirement is landlords are sending them out to all of their renters just to cover their bases in case they want to proceed with eviction with some of the renters. Renters are receiving these notices and some of them are self-evicting. They think that they have to be out by such and such date. And one of the things that we're trying to put out there is that those of us working with renters need to be asking our renters, what kind of document do they have? Do they have a document that came from their landlord, or do they have a document that came from the court? If they have a document that came from the landlord, they're going to want to get their application submitted as soon as possible, and then share a screenshot or that pre-qualification letter with their landlord. That might be enough to head off the eviction or the eviction filing. After the legislature completed their work on the moratorium, then it turned to the courts to see how the courts would implement this. We're seeing some variation across the state, and I'm going to share specifically what's happening in Hennepin County. Even though the off-ramp legislation says the landlord can't proceed with an eviction filing if there's a pending application, in Hennepin, they are not screening out any filings at the time of the filing. So they are sorting it all out at the initial hearing, and it's really important that renters understand they aren't automatically protected by having a pending application. They may need to go to court and demonstrate that they have a pending application in order to secure that safe harbor. So two things, if they get an eviction summons, the first is absolutely make sure they show up in court. They will likely lose if they don't show up in court. And then the second thing is make sure that by the time they have their court hearing, they can show a piece of paper, and they might even just be holding it up to the screen in this virtual hearing, demonstrate that they do have a submitted application with Rent Help MN. There are also legal resources that are available and mediation resources that are available, and all of that information is on the summons. So they should make use of those resources prior to their hearing. The hearings are all virtual right now. Trials are going to be in person, but those initial hearings are all virtual. And that's another way that resource providers can be assisting renters right now, is if they need assistance by having a place to go to attend their hearing virtually. Otherwise, they can call in on their phone. It's a much better experience if they can attend through video conferencing. Secondly, utilities. This has been much unfolding much more quietly. In addition to the eviction moratorium off-ramp, there's been a utility moratorium off-ramp. And for 18 months or so, we had a number of utility companies that were not disconnecting households. And that ended on August 2nd. There is nothing that would prevent a utility company from disconnecting the power for a household, with the exception again of a submitted application. So their off-ramp has written into protection safe harbor for any household that has an emergency assistance program rental application. If they have that, then they can call their utility company, let them know they have an application that's pending, and secure that safe harbor from disconnection. If they are applying for Rent Help MN and including their utilities, and there are reasons why they would want to do that. The income qualifications with Rent Help MN are more generous, and there are more utilities that are covered within Rent Help MN. And of course, it's easier to do one application rather than two. So for those that are looking for utility protection, disconnection protection through their Rent Help MN, they need to call the utility company and let them know that they have that. Utility company is going to ask, when will the money be arriving? And the answer is, we don't know. And we're working with Rent Help MN to be able to provide some kind of notification to utility companies. But right now it's hit and miss on whether or not they're going to get that safe harbor with the Rent Help MN application. For both applicants of rental assistance and applicants of utility assistance, we want to help get the word out that free mediation services are available. And this is something that we piloted during the COVID housing money, the CHAP funding. These applications go so much better when landlords and tenants and when utility companies and households are talking to each other. And that's a difficult thing to do. A lot of life has happened in the last 18 months. We're seeing a lot of situations where communication has broken down, and people need help. Just either relaying information back and forth between renters and property owners and property managers. And sometimes we're bringing them together into the same conversation and working out a plan that works for both. Again, those are difficult conversations. Oftentimes, communication is the thing that makes the difference between losing their housing and keeping their housing. A combination of communication and getting one of these applications submitted. So I want to make sure people know this is a new resource. We just got a grant from the McKnight Foundation, and these are statewide mediation services. And requests can come either directly from applicants themselves. We find it works better if the request comes from the resource provider and there's a soft handoff for mediation services. Mediation is all voluntary. Mediators have no authority to make decisions. They just help open up those lines of communication, and they help people come up with a plan that will keep the lights on or be able to maintain their housing. The easiest way to access those mediation services is by calling Community Mediation Minnesota, and that is 1-833-266-2663. You can go to the website, and there's an online request a mediation form, and there's also an email address where people can request mediation services. And we have a central intake, and those requests will be immediately shared with the mediator who is serving the geographic area or the language need of that person requesting the mediation services. So I'm hoping we can all work together. I often say our resources tend to be siloed, but people don't live in silos. So appreciate any opportunity that mediators, financial resource providers, case managers can be working together to help our renters get through this very difficult time. Thank you. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Beth. And I know we promised some time for Q&A, and we're running pretty close to the top of the hour. We can stay here. If you have any questions, comments, quips, qualms, queries, quandaries, please feel free at this time to unmute yourself, turn your video on, and let us know what information or clarifications we can provide to you.
And Tom, can you stop screen sharing and we can see each other? Thanks. There was a question in the chat. Would people be able to get a copy of the recording of this workshop? And I indicated if you registered through Eventbrite, we have your email address and we can send you a link to the recording of the workshop. If you didn't register through Eventbrite and you want a copy of the recording, a link to the recording of this workshop, please get us your email address and we'll share it with you.
It's always easy to plug it into the chat. Otherwise, if there aren't any questions, we will wrap up here. If you do run into issues, give us a call, send us an email. We are not only a resource to the applicants, not only a resource to the tenants, we are also a resource to you. We're all in this together with the goal of getting these people the help that we need, which is why we're here. So I appreciate everybody joining today. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And if you need anything, let us know.
Thank you.